tắt em anh.
May I ask you some questions?
Sure, go ahead.
What's your name, please?
My name is Cường.
Are you a student?
No, I'm not. I'm a factory worker and I'm working in the factory.
Where do you come from?
I come from Hanoi.
So you come from Hanoi, don't you?
Yes, that's right.
Now, what time do you usually get up?
Well, I usually get up at 6 o'clock.
What do you usually do after getting up?
I usually have breakfast after getting up.
What time do you usually have breakfast?
I usually have breakfast at 6:30.
So you usually have breakfast at 6:30.
That's it.
What do you usually do after having breakfast?
I usually go to work after having breakfast.
How long does it take you to go to work?
It takes me about 15 minutes to go to work.
So it takes you about 15 minutes to go to work.
That's it.
What do you usually do after going to work?
I usually have lunch after going to work.
What time do you usually have lunch?
I usually have lunch at 12:30.
So you usually have lunch at 12:30.
That's it.
What do you usually do after having lunch?
I usually come back home after having lunch.
What time do you usually come back home?
I usually come back home at 4:30.
So you usually come back home at 5:30.
And that's it.
What do you usually do after coming back home?
I usually go to the trip after coming back home.
How long does it take you to go to a gym?
It takes me about an hour to go to a trip.
So it takes you about an hour to go to a gym.
That's it.
What do you usually do after going to a gym?
I usually have bath after going to the trip.
What time do you usually have bath?
I usually have bath at 7:30. I usually have bath at 7:30.
So you usually have bath at 7:30.
That's it.
What do you usually do after having a bath?
I usually have dinner after having a bath.
What time do you usually have bath? What time do you usually have dinner?
I usually have dinner at 10 o'clock.
So you usually have dinner at 10 o'clock.
That's it.
What do you usually do after having dinner?
I usually listen to music after having dinner.
How long does it take you to listen to music?
It takes me about an hour to listen to music.
So it takes you about an hour to listen to music.
That's it.
What do you usually do after listening to music?
I usually go to bed after listening to music.
What time do you usually go to bed?
I usually go to bed at 10:30.
So you usually go to bed at 10:30.
That's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How about you? What's your name is?
My name is Hậu.
Are you a student?
Yes, I am. I'm a first-year student, and I'm studying at the Academy of Finance.
Where you come from?
I come from Hanoi.
So you come from Hậu Việt Anh.
Yes, that's right.
May I ask you some questions?
Pardon?
May I ask you some questions?
Sure, go ahead.
What time do you usually get up?
I usually get up at 6 o'clock.
What do you usually do after getting up?
I usually have breakfast after getting up.
What time do you usually have breakfast?
I usually have breakfast at 6 o'clock.
So you usually have breakfast at 6 o'clock.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after having breakfast?
I usually go to school after having breakfast.
How long does it take you to go to school?
It takes me about 15 minutes to go to school.
So it takes me about 15 minutes to go to school.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after to go to school?
Pardon?
What do you usually after going to school?
Pardon?
What do you usually do after going to school?
I usually come back home after going to school.
What time do you usually come back home?
I usually come back home at 11:30.
So you usually come back home at 11:30.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after coming back home?
I usually have lunch after coming back home.
How does it take you to have lunch?
Pardon?
How long does it take you to have lunch?
It takes me about 20 minutes to have lunch.
So it takes you about 20 minutes. So it takes you about 20 minutes to have lunch.
Yes, that's right.
What do you usually do after have lunch?
Pardon?
What do you usually do after have lunch? What do you usually do after having lunch?
I usually take a nap after having lunch.
What time do you usually take a nap?
I usually take a nap at 1 o'clock.
So you usually take a nap at 1. So you usually take a nap at 1 o'clock.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after taking a nap?
Pardon?
What do you usually after taking a nap?
Pardon?
What do you usually do after taking a nap?
I usually read books after taking a nap.
How does it take you? How long does it take you to read books?
It takes me about 3 hours to read books.
It takes you about 3 hours to read books.
Pardon?
So it takes you about 3 hours to read books.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after reading books?
I usually have bath after reading books.
What time do you usually have bath?
I usually have a bath at 6:30.
So you usually have bath at 6:30.
Yes, that's right.
What do you usually do after having a bath?
I usually have dinner after having a bath.
What time do you usually have dinner?
I usually have dinner at 7 o'clock.
So you usually have dinner at 7 o'clock.
Yes, exactly.
What do you usually do? What do you usually do after having dinner?
I usually watch television after having dinner.
What time do you usually watch your television?
I usually watch television at 10 o'clock.
So you usually watch your television at 10 o'clock.
Pardon?
So you usually watch your television at 10 o'clock.
Exactly.
What do you usually do after watching television?
I usually go to bed after watching television.
What time do you usually go to bed?
I usually go to bed at 10:30.
So you usually go to bed at 10:30.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ta-ta.
Ta-ta.